Welcome, everybody. I think most of you know me. I'm Debbie Aquino. I'm current president of TEO. And today we're doing a little kind of a get-together panel discussion about street photography. What is the genre? There are a lot of different types of street photography, and they all kind of cross over into one another. They are photojournalism, documentary photography, street photography, and we have three of our members who are going to talk about that. Nancy is going to talk about documentary photography. In fourth grade, she armed with a Brownie bullseye camera, she documented her week-long summer camp. Her love for short story documentary photography has continued throughout her life. In this pursuit, she has studied with Sam Abel, Jay Mazel, Arthur Meyerson, Gerd Ludwig, and Jane Evelyn Atwood, and has traveled throughout the world in order to experience and document other cultures and daily lives. Our second presenter will be Mike McCartney, and he is just going to talk about street. Mike picked up a 2¼ 120 film camera around 1963 using the Kodak box for settings on the way to a career in engineering. In 1980, with Ansel's books and an Olympus OM2S, he set out to systematically learn the ins and outs of photography more formally. His preferred photography is street photography, art photography, and non-traditional landscapes at noon with Olympus, Leica, Ricoh, and iPhone cameras. And third is Scott Harrison, whose specialty will be photojournalism. Scott got into photography in 1970. He has a journalism degree from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in 1975. He was a staff photographer for Thousand Oaks News Chronicle from 1982 to 1990. He is a past president of the Press Photographers Association of Greater Los Angeles, 1986 to 1988, and a Los Angeles Times from the Archives Photography blog, 2010 to 2019. Please welcome our panel.
Thank you.
And Nancy's going to start us off with 10 photos and talk about what she wants to talk about.
Sure. Good afternoon. So each one of us has 10 photographers that we're going to use as kind of exemplars for each genre. When I think about documentary photography, I think about long-form storytelling, multiple images in some defined context. All those contexts could be really broad, like a trip across the United States, or very narrow, like a particular family or a particular person that gets followed, for some time. You'll see in my slides, it's hard to talk about documentary photography with just one image because it's about a body of work. There's content, which is the body of work, and their style. And so when you think about documentary photography, street, and photojournalism, you're going to see the styles very much overlap, and it's really about the content and the intent. Next. So I wanted to start with somebody who's actually considered to be one of the founders of documentary photography, and I didn't realize that it wasn't really a genre until Dorothea Lange and the other Farm Security Administration photographers were hired to document the Depression. And so, Dorothea Lange is mostly known for that image of the migrant mother, which is part of her immigrant series of farm laborers during the Depression era. But she also did a lot of work of the Japanese internment during World War II, which I didn't even know, but it's really interesting. There's a lot more you can read about Japanese internment if you're interested, including Rachel Maddow's Burn Order. Next. So Robert Frank is a Swiss-born photographer, actually Swiss-American. I guess he lived in America for a while, and he was influenced by a number of photographers, including Walker Evans, who did a series of, we're going to document America. For some reason, during the Beat era, it was very, de rigueur to document America, spend a year documenting America. So The Americans is probably Robert Frank's most famous book. He did that under a Guggenheim Award, so he put together an idea, and got a Guggenheim Fellowship to document America, very much kind of mimicking the beat style of the writers like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and William S. Burroughs. So, and I hope you can spend some time reading each one of these quotes that we have for each one of these. It gives you an idea about how they think about documentary photography overall. But you can see in the especially in this one, in the composition, that it's really a compositional style that you'll see across all these genres. Next. So Larry Fink, where did I put Larry Fink? Forgot about Larry Fink here. Or I'm out of order. Larry Fink, there we go. Larry Fink is an American photographer. He's just recently passed away. He was born in 1941, so fairly contemporary. He was a student of another very famous documentary photographer, Lisette Modell, who was also the tutelage for Dorothea Lange. She taught in New York City. One of his most important works is a book called Social Graces. And he contrasted the wealthy Manhattanites against a particular one single family in rural Pennsylvania. So what you see here are two different images from the book and the contrast. So his idea was to use documentary photography to show this contrast of lifestyles that exist in the same period of time. So the New York Times described it as two radically divergent worlds while accomplishing one of the things that straight photography does best, providing excruciatingly intimate glimpses of real people and their all too fallible human lives. Okay, so Sally Mann next. Sally Mann is an American photographer from the South, from Virginia. She grew up in like a farm in Virginia and still lives in a farm in Virginia and raised her children in a farm in Virginia. An immediate family, these are a couple images from immediate family, or one image from immediate family. And what she says about photography, she always photographed what was around her. And in immediate family, she actually got into quite a bit of trouble with the kind of conservative culture of the 90s. And they accused her of doing child pornography. But the thing about documentary photography is setup photography is okay. So in fact, each one of these images in immediate family, many of them are set up collaborations with her children to do this. Okay, so next we have Konstantin Manos. I first learned about Konstantin Manos being a musician, a classically trained musician, because he did this book for the Boston Symphony at 19. And I have a copy of this book, and it's just amazing. The guy was just a genius from the start. So he photographed the Boston Symphony at their summer home, Tanglewood. And for me, it was very interesting because I studied with musicians at the Boston Symphony, as did my husband. And so we're looking through, well, there's Mr. Ralph Gomberg, So, and he went on to be published in Life and Look and a magnet photographer. And he just passed away, just like the last one. So next. So Jane Evelyn Atwood is an American photographer, but she's been living in France since she was in her late teens or early 20s. And her first work there, she didn't know anything about photography, but she wanted to like see life. So she spent a good deal of time with this one prostitute at this one red light district house, following her and photographing her. That's called Rue de Lombard. But she's probably most famous for her work photographing women in prisons. In her book, Too Much Time, Women in Prison. And she tells stories about how many, many, many women are in prison after they murder or kill or brutally do something to their abusive, male partners. And she says it's a story that's told over and over again of the women get caught and the men never do. All right, so Jane is actually giving probably a 3-day, I think, a 3-day or 1-week course at the LACP late in fall. So if you want to, I traveled with her to Japan. She's fascinating. She's an open book. She's great to work with. So she still uses a black and white film and an M7, like an M7. She's used all her career practically. All right, so Next, we have Martin Parr, and I would call him a cheeky photographer. Really known for, capturing places like Brighton and it's called the Epsom Derby, which is like our Kentucky Derby in England. Although he's traveled around the world, he also just passed away recently. This is like a really good example of the kind of cheeky stuff that he does. Next. Next, we have Alex Webb. Alex Webb's a Nat Geo photographer and freelance. He's probably one of the most influential photographers for this style of highly layered street photojournalistic and documentary photography. His projects are often related to countries or place. For example, he did one after the bankruptcy of Kodak. He did a documentary of the impact that had on Rochester, New York, where, it went into a series of decline because one of the major employers of the area had just gone bankrupt. Next. So Jonas Bendixson is a Magnum photographer, and I saw some of his work early in a thing called Satellites, where he photographed all the former Soviet Union separatist republics, all the stands, as we call them. But these two images are taken from a book called The Places We Live, and I have a copy of that too, if you want to look at it. And he took all four, so most of these slums, the places we live were the slum communities in Nairobi, Mumbai, Jakarta, and Caracas. And, these slum communities, they aren't like fancy houses, they're 4 walls, essentially. And so he would actually set these up, he'd have them posed, they're very casually posed, but they're posed. And he would photograph all 4 walls. And so the book is sort of interleaved between sort of, single images and then these 4 walls of the family and the family who live there. It's really quite interesting. And then last but not least is Vicky, I think. Anybody speak Danish or Norwegian? She's a Belgium photographer. And she focuses, she's actually, so quite young. So she focuses on encounters with strangers. And these 4 images were taken from a book she called I'm About to Call It a Day, where she would meet somebody and say, I'd like to spend a night with you and photograph you and get 1 image. So it's 1 image from each one of these strangers that she met. It's a book of that. And she does that. So she got into stargazing. So she did her latest project is like a book where she meets stargazers like as strangers and then photographs them. So there we go. So I kind of did that in historical order. I hope that gives you an idea.
Okay, I'm going to talk about street photography. It's not photojournalism and it's not documentary, and it has parts of those in it. So let's put up the first chart. Is that Tetsuo Suzuki?
A little close to you, man.
Is that Tetsuo Suzuki?
Yes.
I love his work, and I love watching him photograph. He goes out and shoots maybe 2,000 photographs with a little Ricoh GR running up and down the street. He does high contrast black and white. He's very aggressive photographer. He gets right up to people and snaps the picture and goes to the next person before people even know what happened. He was a Fuji ambassador, and Fuji didn't like his style because a lot of people were offended by it. So they canceled his ambassadorship. He publishes a magazine called Void Tokyo. And it's similar to the Provoke magazine that I'll talk about later. But his high contrast black and white photography is something that I really like. So, and I like how he does his photography. Next. The next one is the most famous probably of the group here is Bruce Gilman. He invented flash photography for the street. He was started out as his father was a junkyard owner that wore a little pinky ring. And his mother was a prostitute, so he comes from kind of a hardscrabble life. He worked for a while in the junkyard and didn't like it and went out to become a photographer, and then decided to separate himself from everybody else by using a flash. And he uses a flash in people's faces. He literally jumps out at people with the flash and takes their picture with the flash. He's photographed all over the world, from Yakuza to motorcycle gangs to prostitutes lately in Mexico. Does close-up portraits in color now. Most of his work's black and white. So everybody uses flash probably owes it to Bruce Gilman. Next. Amina Hinspeter is Chilean. She's deaf. And she does a lot of portraits like these you see here that of poor neighborhoods. And she says she loves all these people that she photographs. And she doesn't photograph beautiful people, she photographs real people. And she has thousands of photographs like this, and they've been shown all over the world. There's several in Spanish stories you can pick up online and read about her photography and how she does it and why she does it. Google Translate will translate the web pages for you so you can read about it. Next. Daido Moriyama is a post-war photographer, really, even though he's in his 80s and still walking around Tokyo for photography. There was a magazine called Provoke that came out in 69 and 70. Iko Hosei, Iko Narahara, Daido Moriyama, a lot of these people, they photographed the R.A. bokeh, grainy, blurry, out of focus photography. Very black and white, grainy, gritty, totally the antithesis of camera club photography. He uses point and shoot cameras to this day. I think he uses a Ricoh now. He's a pure snapshot photographer. He doesn't look at the viewfinder. He's published hundreds of books. And he's, like I said, he's still walking around Tokyo taking pictures until he falls dead. But if you Japanese black and white post-war photography is Daido Moriyama. Next. Joshua K. Jackson is a younger, probably the youngest one of the group, UK photographer. He used to walk around to develop his career 8-9 hours a night through London. Just walk, photograph. He uses color and the movie cinema style in his photography. As you can see from this photograph, it's very bright, lots of reds, greens, blues, night, high contrast, Rembrandt, moody color, and lots of silhouettes, people in cars. So his is kind of is the color version of Daido Moriyama's black and white, if you will. Next. Now I threw Ganesh Banari in here. The most famous photographer in India is the Magnum photographer Raghu Rai. And he photographed for the Hindustan Times. He photographed all the celebrities like Mother Teresa and everybody in India. Ganesh Banari is young, and he built his whole online presence, and all of his photography everything's online. He has like 1 million followers on Instagram. He photographs these festivals like you see here, but he also photographs landscapes and mountains and portraits. He does every kind of photography you can think of. A lot of it is street, a lot of it is India, everything's India. I recommend you look at his work because it's beautiful. I think he's one of the best photographers working out there right now in any genre. Next. Sally Davis is a New York photographer. She's been photographing in New York since probably the 70s. She's art connected, a lot of her work's in the Met. She knew Andy Warhol. And she likes to say that he told her, follow your style, no matter what your style is, even if people don't like it, follow it. Just do it. And so she always has, her style has a kind of a gritty look, like these photographs. She photographs a lot of pictures of her roof. She photographs cars. She comes to Palm Springs in the wintertime and photographs the mid-century houses and the cars. But then she also photographs a lot of portraits of New Yorkers, and she has a book out of portraits of New York, and it's some of the art's in the map. So she's kind of a little different kind of street photographer, more buildings and less people, but also other kinds of photography. Next. Brasai is one of my favorite photographers. He's a Hungarian immigrant to Paris. And he started out in the 30s in Paris, photographing the night. He went to brothels, he went to parties, gay meetups. He photographed the sewer workers coming around, pumping out the septic tanks. He photographed gangsters. He photographed dives. He went to all the dangerous places. There were huge parties they used to have in Paris that were rowdy parties, but people came from all over for him. He used to photograph those. Considering this is a film camera at night in Paris in the 1930s on a tripod, his photographs are amazing to me. A lot of his photographs look like you can walk into the photograph because he just captures the whole scene, the whole feeling. He was also very connected to the intelligentsia and the art community. He was a sculptor, an artist, and a writer, and he went around with people like Picasso at the time. He came to the US in 1957 and photographed in New York City, Chicago, and New Orleans. So he's got some really nice color work at that time. Next. Ouija is another fun photographer to look at. He's a Russian emigre, turn of the century, came out of the Jewish ghettos of New York. He lived in a tiny little apartment and he had a police scanner. So he's a bit of a photojournalist. He would listen to the police scan all night. And then if there was a murder in particular, because that's his quote there, murder is my business. He photographed all these shootings and murders and everything that were happening in New York, as well as fires. The photograph you see of all those people, that's a fire from an apartment building. So he would listen to the scanner and then he'd try to get there before everybody else. And then he'd sell it to the tabloids. The tabloids were just starting to come into existence at that time. And so they were his clients. He was one of the early photographers of Coney Island. And then he photographed high society. And he ended up as an actor and a consultant between 46 and the 60s in Hollywood. Next. Helen Levitt is probably somebody you may not have heard of. She's a New York City mid-century photographer. A lot of her work is children. She photographed children, chalk drawings, children outside playing, children in fire hydrants. Much of that was done because at that time she went to areas like Spanish Harlem. They did not have air conditioning, television. Maybe some people had radios. That was about it. So people lived on the street, especially the kids. So she went through all these neighborhoods and photographed them all in black and white, and then she switched to color. And she complained later in the century that, New York had changed. People were inside now watching TV, so she lost the people she photographed. She had a lot of extensive work in color that got stolen in a burglary. And you could compare her to Vivian Mayer, a lot of people have heard of, and say which one is the better photographer. My opinion is Helen Levitt is much better because her work is more alive, more capturing what the street looks like. Vivian Mayer was an observer that stood back. It's important in street photography to be part of the street. You're there as part of the street. You're not an observer. You're not standing there photographing from the distance. You have to get right in there to get good photographs. And she did that kind of thing. So that's it.
Hi, guess we got Gordon up there. Okay, my background is quite a bit different. I went through school studying photojournalism and because of that, photojournalism to me is accuracy. You're reporting with a camera, and deadlines are really important, and you're reporting to the viewers. So that means we end up becoming more like observers of many situations. Even though a lot of photojournalists do long-term projects, so will probably fall more in documentary. But they still have a deadline. It might be a year, but so anyway. Gordon Converse was my first boss in 1974. I interned at the Christian Science Monitor. And so I got to know him. He was a World War II photographer who he was an early adopter of 35 millimeter film and available live black and white photography. So during that summer, there was an interesting story. A photographer took a really nice picture of a pond, basically a landscape photo of a pond. And Gordon kind of pushed him, the photographer, to do better because it didn't have a human aspect. And that to me was really important for photojournalists to record the influence of humanity on the planet. Okay. The interesting thing about Gordon was that in 1958, he traveled all over the world, and I forget how many heads of states he photographed in this series that he did. And because of that and other work he did that year, he won a special prize from the National Press Photographer Association in 1959. Each year, the National Press Photographer Association has a photographer of the year for newspapers and a photographer of the year for magazines. That year, they created a combined award. So he won it was a third award that he was given him. And it's because his work transcends it into magazines so much, even though it was all black and white. Okay, we'll move on. Next, please. Okay, now Dan Winters. Most people don't realize that he's really photojournalist on his original origins. He grew up locally. He graduated from Moore Park College to study photography under John Gray, which is a pretty well-known photography instructor who's passed away since then. When I worked at the News Chronicle from 1982 to 1990, he had 2 stints there. And around 84, he was a lab tech, quit, walked across Australia, came back. I heard him back as a staff photographer. He was there about a year. And then in 1988, he went to the first Eddie Adams workshop. And as I understand, he won the top award there. And he came back to the News Chronicle and said, bye. He resigned, and in 2 weeks, he was back in New York and he started his career. So he's probably one of the more famous people who come from photojournalists you may have heard about. In 1924, Winters was one of the photographers profiled in the 6-part National Geographic television series Photographer. And you know, if you really want to understand his way he thought and his approach to photography, that's the program to watch. He always had a really outgoing attitude. It's like everything was wow. He was he just lit up on anything would inspire him. He was also really good at preconception, where he could see the photo in his head and then go out and actually build it. And you'll see in his books that he's done all these portraits of celebrities. He did all these Rolling Stone covers, built his career. And I think the photo of there is the book is the America Icons and Ingenuity. It's a 2012 book with 2 decades of celebrity portraits by Winters. It's one of 5 books you can find on his website, including one that he did on the last days of the space shuttle program, which I thought was pretty interesting. Okay, next. This is Carolyn Cole. Okay. Now, Carolyn Cole was an LA Times photographer. One thing you'll find is because of my background, 9 of the 10 photographers we're covering are people I knew. Okay, they got work said. Carolyn Cole started after I did at the LA Times, and she was the conflict photographer. If there was war, she was there. Okay. But the LA Times quickly knew they had the right choice because in 1997, she got behind police lines to get exclusive images of the dying suspect, one of the North Hollywood bank shootout robbers. Okay. Some of the other photo staff said, why'd you have to? Bosses are scared. They love their photos. Over the next decade, Cole covered conflicts for the Times in Israel, Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, Haiti, and Monrovia, Libya, where her images won the 2004 Pulitzer for feature photography. There's a quote that I don't think I added up there. She said once, the dangers of covering conflicts are real. Photographer and friend Chris Andrus along with Tim Hetherington, were both killed in Libya during the Arab Spring. Associated Press photographer, photojournalist Anita Nitris was killed in a targeted attack in Afghanistan. An eyewitness, a colleague, grazed in the head by a bullet in Haiti, just to name a few. Bullets was for say. What's next? Okay, Art Rogers. He's probably a photographer I didn't hear about, but he was one of the top photographers when I was doing research on this blog I did for the LA Times. And he started at the LA Times just before the start of the Second World War. And during the war, as with many LA Times photographers, they were recruited to be photographers in the military during the war. And he was known for his creative features in sports photography. Now, one of my favorite pictures, which is not up here, is called LA Airport. It was shot in 1946, and it's a line of jackrabbits with their ears stuck straight up with a couple of DC trees behind it. The LA Airport was published a couple of weeks later in Life magazine. And it generated so much publicity, LA mayor started a controversy when he said there's no animals at the LA Airport. So for the next decade, it added, yes, LA Times photographers would always go shoot wildlife photos around the LA International. Okay, and as Rogers emailed me, he said someone was using a jackhammer and suddenly stopped and all the rabbit ears went up. Okay, that's Rogers, who was a mentor, I don't know which quotes I have up there, but Rogers was a mentor to many younger photographers in the paper. Later, he was quoted as saying that he was happiest when making pictures, and I think I'm the same way. I'm happiest when I'm out with my camera. And once had 22 photos appear in one Sunday edition. Next. Boris Yarrow. Now, you probably have all seen his photos of the Robert Kennedy assassination in 1968. Well, the key to his story is that he was off that day. He took one camera, 2 lenses, and a roll of Tri-X film, and went to get a picture he was going to hang on his wall. The next thing you know, he's on the front page of the next day's paper with the almost exclusive photos of the assassination. And basically, Bill Everidge of Life magazine was also there. So if you want to see a larger set of the assassination, go to the Life magazine website, because Boris he shot his photos, he shot 6 frames, and had to get back to the paper. The key was that he shot Tri-X film, which I think was rated about 145 or 150 those days, not 400. He shot it at 30th of a second in dim light. And because he was a witness, they quickly were interviewing him when he got back to the paper. They interviewed him. The film was sent back to the photo lab, and back in those days, when there was questionable black and white film, it was processed what method called inspection, where you use the dim green light in the dark room, and you would have to look at the emulsion on the films. After it's been in the developer for a while, you'd have to look at the emulsion and see if there's enough density in it. Literally, visual inspection in the dark room. And that's both his and Bill Ettridge's film was done that way. And I've read accounts from Life magazine darkroom saying how they rescued his film. Both were underexposed and had to be saved in the darkroom. That year, he did not win the Pulitzer because that was the year that the assassination in Vietnam, where the person was killed, that won the Pulitzer. Next one was George Rose. Okay, now George is interesting. He studied with Ansel Adams. He was at the LA Times for just 6 years. Okay, but in my research of doing the From the Archive blog, the last decade, his work just kept popping up. He had really high quality black and white prints, and they were all of the entertainment industry. In the 70s, 60s, and 70s, the LA Times, each section of the paper basically had their own photographers or multiple photographers. So he directly worked for the calendar section. For 6 years, he was photographing every night, concerts all over the place. So during the golden era of rock and roll and all of them, he had a lot of images. So after leaving the Times, Rose continued freelancing. He spent 15 years working for the NFL shooting football games. And then it ended up in the wine industry. And this day he lives up in Salt Lake. So I follow him and he posts images all the time, so he's one to follow if you want to see someone who has a great different amount of different kinds of work. So let's go on to the next one. John Malman is another LA Times photographer whose work nobody really knows about, and I kept finding his photos, and he was just about the best LA Times photographer in the 40s and 50s and 60s, the LA Times. And the quote up there talks about a layout editor once commented to a call, this is from his obituary, that if he knew Malman would be shooting the assignment, they'd give him extra space even without seeing the photo ahead of time. Because he was that good. Every day he came back with wonderful images. Now, the sad part about John Malman is that he had dementia later in life. Both of his sons had died in accidents. And one of the sons had been a freelance photographer, feature photographer. So his family was never there to save his work. Okay, so to this day, the only places you find him is like in LA Times archive at UCLA or various sources like that. So that's it's one of these photographers that I'm afraid the history is going to lose all our work. There's just on a sidebar here. I came up through photojournalism in newspapers in the golden age of newspapers. Okay, in the 40s, the LA Times had 5 newspapers. They each had their own photo staffs. And of course, in the 80s, it was down to 1. But still, all over the country, basically thousands of photographers documented every day. And now their work is being lost. And that's documented history. Next one. Lee Weiner. Okay. He's a real character. When he was a teenager, Luigi was one of his teachers. Okay. I met him in 1983 when I took his class at UCLA Extension on photographing people. And he has a book with the same name that it's a really good book. I recommend that book. It's hard to find now, but it has not only his work, but also, especially with the celebrities, because he did all these assignments for Life magazine. It has his story behind it. He has great stories about early Hollywood in the 50s and 60s. He did a talk show and things like that. But in the 1980s, let's see, Willie Weiner continued with corporate clients to shoot black and white film. And he had his portrait lens mounted on a rack. A lot of times you see these focusing rails that photographers have for background. No, he was shooting portraits with that set up. They gave him a different kind of look and background, things like that. So when I went to research him, Life magazine has a page on his work with their stuff. And the photo of him that's up on the screen, that's my photo from the 1983 class. I found that photo sitting on the Life magazine website. So I just kind of laughed about that. Small world. Yeah, documentation. Next. Okay, now I cannot talk about Los Angeles-based photojournalists decade, for the years, while talking about George Watson. He was the leading photographer on a 4-generation family of photographers around Los Angeles. His father, around 1900, when he first came here, was doing photography, but he wasn't shooting for newspapers specifically, but he had a lot of photos. He had 6 nephews, okay? They were all photographers, the same family, the 6 nephews. They all went into photography or worked for TV stations in the 50s and 60s. Now, the same 6, plus there were 3 or 4 sisters, were child actors in the 1920s in Hollywood. Okay, so the whole family has a Hall of Fame Walk of Fame star. Okay, one of the 6 nephews, his son Daniel Watson, just retired as a newspaper photographer at the Santa Cruz Signal. And the link that I have for the entire extended family, the Santa Cruz paper a year ago did a 5-part series on the whole family. So that's still online. So that's one family that hasn't been lost. But one of the other members of the family created what they call the Watson Family Archives, which I think is still there, but it's not being actively promoted or can't find it online anymore. But when I last visited them about 10 or 12 years ago, the family had nearly 1 million negatives from their 10 people, photographers, plus another 1 or 2 photographers that were friends of theirs. Over did it. Okay, next. Okay, this is the only photographer I didn't know, but we all know who he is. Okay. I picked him because I consider him the origins of the photo essay. Okay, in Life magazine. In August of 1948, Eugene Smith for several weeks followed Dr. Ernest Sirian in the town of Cremington, Colorado. It was a thinly small town, rural area, and he had to travel all over the place following this doctor. And when it became published, it was considered the first true photo essay in Life magazine, the critics of all. And they followed that up with in a Spanish village in 1951, and also a nurse midwife in 1951. Now, Eugene Smith was another person who started early, right off the bat, using 35 millimeter available light, and at times got into trouble with clients who wanted him to shoot better quality images, but he said no. He always had that, I'm doing it my way. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, heck with you. Okay. So that, of course, ended up with the him in 1971 through 74 living in Japan for the the Minamata disaster. It was it was bad mercury basically in the water. It was making everybody sick in this community in Japan. And of course, that ended up as a book, and Johnny Depp portrayed him in the 2020 movie. So if you really want to know something about W. Eugene Smith, just go home tonight and watch the 2020 movie.